All right, everyone, we are waiting for more people to join, and then we will kick off. Again, welcome everyone. We are giving people a few more minutes to join, and then we'll go ahead and we'll get started. All right, we'll give one more minute and then we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon to those on the East Coast. Good morning to those on the West Coast, and our friends everywhere in between. Good day to you. A few housekeeping items as we get started. The most often asked question at these webinars, will we be sharing the materials afterwards? Yes, we will share the video afterwards. Also, please keep an eye out for a blog post that we will be authoring that will have all of the major themes that we're talking about today, as well as the killer quotes from our participants here. Third piece of housekeeping, yes, again, we will be sending out the video. And fourth, you should share that video. Make yourself a little celebrity by sharing that you attended this session and heard all of these great things. Last but not least, how do you ask us questions and become a participant as well? There is a Q&A at the bottom of the screen. So you can go ahead and chat. We'll be collecting those, and as we go through, we will make those available to our panelists, and they'll get deep into your questions and their answers. So first up, we are going to hear from Truthset's CEO and founder, Scott McKinley. He's going to walk us through where are we today and everything along those lines. What brought you to this webinar? Next, we'll have a conversation with our esteemed panelists, Beck Kennedy from Heineken, as well as Kevin Dean, COO of Infutor. And this is a great place to start putting your questions into the Q&A, because after we talk to these panelists, we will be addressing them directly to get their view as well as just Truthset's view overall. And then we'll return back to Scott McKinley to close out how the future is now, how you should be taking action now on targeting and activation, planning, audience measurement, all of these things, but again, starting now. So without further ado, we're going to kick it over to Scott McKinley.
Hey everybody, welcome. Really glad you guys could make it. I think we all know there's a ton of these kinds of webinars talking about, what are we going to do when all these changes come into effect? And there's a spectrum of fear about that and uncertainty. And I think what we really hope to bring you guys all on the phone here or on the Zoom is some certainty and some comfort that things are going to change, but they're actually going to get better in a lot of ways. I think it's going to be better for brands, certainly better for consumers, even better for marketplaces and platforms, and even the data provider, the more responsible data providers like we have Infutor on the phone here. So we're going to talk through how these guys are already sort of positioning themselves for success in this new world, and how you guys on the phone here can also do that as well. So the first setup here is just the sort of state of the nation. If you go ahead and hit that button, Kelly, I'm gonna have to tell you when to hit go. Things had to change. I think we all know that. All of us who've been in and around ad tech for as long as we have know that it just kind of it got out of control. The way that all the companies in the so-called Lumascape had evolved to capture the exhaust of all of us as consumers as we moved around our devices and publishers and services, it just wasn't okay to do all that with no awareness whatsoever from the consumer about what was happening, how their data was being packaged up and sold back to brands, and used even to manipulate them in some cases, as we saw with a recent election. So, the tracking, the surreptitious methods of gathering all that behavior and then monetizing it in a billion different ways just had to end. Secondly, the incentives around the ad tech ecosystem ended up focused almost exclusively on scale with almost no regard to accuracy. And that led to, the crazy kinds of conversations I'm sure we've all had. I had a conversation one time with a major DMP where the head of analytics, gleefully told me that he could deliver, more soccer moms in Kansas City than there are, people on the planet Earth, and could back it up mathematically. I mean, that sort of statement, we've all heard it a million times. These unbelievably large, impossibly large audiences of increasingly narrow attributes just weren't a thing, and they weren't good for anybody. It led to lack of trust in the ecosystem, poor results, and so on. Complicated, opaque, and costly supply chain. I mean, this is the so-called ad tech tax that it just steals so much value out of your media dollar. If you're a brand, you don't know where your dollar's going. All you know is that I spent $1 and I got 25 or 30 cents back on the other end. That's not any good. And then the last piece is something that we as Truthset are bringing into this ecosystem, which is helping clean up all the prior problems, right? It's this notion of accuracy. It's not okay just to have tons and tons and tons of fuel to put into all these engines to run ad tech and personalization and commerce. We need to start paying attention to how good that fuel source is, and not only how good it is, but how consented it is, and is it respecting consumer privacy. So this is where we were. Let's talk about where we're going to go. So from that to a beautiful world of consented consumer identity, where we're no longer guessing, fingerprinting, extrapolating, inferring who a person is and what they might be doing. Instead, it's going to be all consented in terms of identity. The data itself attached to that identity has also got to be reputable and consented, coming from folks, traditional data providers like Infutor, our partner on the phone here, who have consent to gather that data, do it responsibly, and do it with a notion of accuracy, not just, again, creating these impossible segments that, 68 million segments that are impossible in the census-based world we live in. Representing actual people, transparency and efficiency. This is what we all want, right? The thing had bloated out of control, and it needs to contract and become more real, transparent, so everyone knows what they're getting, what they're paid for, and all of this sort of surreptitious activity goes away. And then again, all of this should be validated, right? The precision and accuracy around who a person is, are they consented, and are we compliant with that, the use of their data, and then use that for much more person-based audience planning and activation. So where we were, not great, we all know it. Where we're going is a much better place for consumers, for brands, for marketplaces, and for publishers. And it's not like things were all that great to begin with. The so-called precision and performance of addressable marketing had, again, bloated to a place where it was kind of unrecognizable. We perform a quarterly analysis across hundreds and hundreds of data providers and many, many different demographics. And here's some nuggets that are useful to illustrate how things were not as sort of perfect as some might say. In one given segment of these are people IDs, right? This is not cookies and maze. People IDs in one segment, over 1 billion IDs are sitting there pretending to be people. Well, there are only, what, 330 million people in the country. There's no way there's 1 billion. I mean, this is just the kind of bloat in identity that we've been dealing with, right? It needs to contract. In terms of accuracy for that segment, gender. Now remember, gender is a 50-50, pretty much 50-50 distribution in the country. So 61% isn't that great. To bump up only 11 points over what you would get with random distribution is not a super result. Yet that's what we saw as the average accuracy across 75 different providers who are offering gender segments for sale in various marketplaces. And age, it even gets worse. When we looked at 132 providers for accuracy of age data, we found out that the average accuracy was only 32%. So these numbers are not very good. There's a lot of reasons behind them. There's a lot of ways to make them better. But this is just to illustrate how where we were was not great, and how things can get better, as we'll show you through this presentation. Go to the next slide, Kelly. And again, all this waste, of course, costs marketers money. For a given, here's a sample of what it would cost, what you think it costs to reach 1,000 Hispanics. By the way, this is just data costs. This isn't even media costs. So things get extrapolated and made even worse when you add an $8 or $10 video CPM onto this. But just the cost for data, when you factor in waste, you might think you're paying 85 cents for 1,000 records who are, quote, Hispanic, but when you factor in the actual accuracy, and we've seen this is an actual study we did for a client, you're actually paying $5.46 to reach 1,000 Hispanics because so few of them are actually Hispanic. So again, the waste isn't good, the bloat's not good, the performance isn't good, and the whole world could stand to get a lot better. So I'll kick it over to the panel discussion, which is what you all came to hear about, and then we'll wrap up with how you can actually start testing and using these capabilities now to move from a bad today to a better future.
Thanks, Scott. I am very, very excited to welcome our two guests in this panel. And you're right. I think this is what everyone wanted to hear from. I know I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you to Rebecca Kennedy, who's the Director of Consumer Data Strategy at Heineken USA, and to Kevin Dean, the COO of Infutor. Like I said, for both of you, I'm very excited to have you here. If you don't mind, I'll have each of you just say a quick few words, introduce yourselves, a little bit about your background so that we set the stage for all the context that we can provide to the audience here. Beck, you want to quick introduction?
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. And hi to everyone that's joined today. So I currently work at Heineken USA as the Director of Consumer Data Strategy. And what that actually means is that my role is focused on finding the right ways to reach out consumers, the drinkers of our brands, and also to drive our first-party data strategy. Prior to that, I worked at Heineken UK, and then my background is in programmatic media.
Awesome. And Kevin, how about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Kevin Dean, currently Chief Operating Officer here at Infutor. I've been here about 9 months, and what I'm really focused on here is primarily leading the organization's overall strategy, driving better efficacy and results for our brands, customers, as it relates to our data and product offerings. Really excited to be here, and Aaron, thanks for having me.
Well, let's jump right into it. Now, thanks for joining us. I'm going to jump right into it, and I'm going to start with you, Kevin. Just reflecting back on sort of what Scott set up for us all. We would say, hey, with this big change coming, it's not like everything was great to begin with. And I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective. You not only are you deep in the world of third-party data today, you've been there, I know, for a number of years, and have some very deep experience in that world. Kind of just from that, even from a data provider's perspective, what would you say has not been fantastic about this entire space, regardless of the presence of cookies and maids and other anonymous forms of identity?
Yeah, I think, and Scott did cover this a little bit at the beginning, and some really good, interesting stats. Excuse me, but over the last 5 years, I've primarily operated under, and I think a lot of us have, that we're going to look at 40% match rate and 40% accuracy, and so net effective rate of 16%. I remember that rule of 40 was driven into me, and we'd have clients and partners and brands that would come to say, well, how do we resolve that? and they only wanted to resolve it inside of the digital ecosystem. Well, how can I make programmatic better? And it always came back to, well, if you want to make it better, if you want to get the one-to-one, you've got to go to the tried and true methodologies that direct marketers have known for the last 30 plus years. And that is first party data plus third party data, introduce some analytics, you're going to get the best result. If you follow that principle, and then you say, how do I apply that principle in the world of digital advertising? And how do I connect my offline data into that world? You're going to get a better result if you start to think about what's going to give me the best reach with the highest level of accuracy. And unfortunately, that's not a cookie answer. That's going to some other form of an identifier where I can reach into that space to have success. And I look back at that, and I don't like to say I chuckle about it, but again, it's the things that we as data experts know, and that's the collective we, those of us on this call today, we know the value of first plus third plus analytics and what it means and how to leverage that in the market.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And you kind of mentioned, like, it is about reach. It's not about total scale of cookies or other forms of ID for a brand. It's about reach. And I'll take that to you, Rebecca. From your perspective, you've I think I've known you long enough. You've kind of lived through some of the explosion of new techniques and capabilities for brands to employ from programmatic, and as Kevin mentioned, the application of first party, third party. What has been the traditional challenges from your perspective, even given what has been available in the past? What, I guess maybe a little bit, what was good about that from a brand? Like, what have you seen brands, really grab onto and do great things with, but what's also really been a challenge despite what was possible?
Yeah, I guess, like, as we adapt and these changes come to the forefront, we need to reconsider how we're doing things. So we speak to drinkers of import beer brands, so not just beer drinkers, specifically import beer drinkers, and that's hard to do online, right? Considering, to Scott's point, it's pretty much a coin flip in regards to gender. We need to make sure they're LDA 21 plus. So
right.
We've known for a while that there are huge issues with accuracy of third-party data, and it is crazy that we still have to continue to verify that. So every time we choose a partner and put out a plan, we have to build in, okay, how are we going to use a panel or a survey to measure how accurate this is. So I think that shift from, and to Scott's point again, shift from reach to qualified reach as an industry mindset change is really important as well.
Yeah. Edwin, would you say, I guess yourself, I'm sort of like putting you in the spotlight here, but you can even speak a little bit more for at large. Does the organization feel like the results that come from some of the targeted or addressable marketing activities of the past are kind of commensurate with what you'd expect, or is it viewed as there's certainly room for improvement? We can always do better, and some of the challenges are that the things that hold us back from that. Kind of, what's your perspective there?
Yeah, I think the business view is that addressable media is very customizable. So we can look at the demo SKU of our traditional media and then use digital to kind of fill that gap. Yeah. But again, it becomes harder for us to understand our qualified reach across not just channels now, but properties with these changes that come to the fore. So the continued sort of dominance of the walled gardens makes it hard for us to understand true reach and frequency. It affects targeting. Few things to consider, but I think digital has always changed, right? So it's just being ready to use it in the best way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to come back to you, Kevin. So we've sort of talked about some of the challenges got created across identities, and the glut of scale, as Scott began to point out. I guess we can kind of leave that all in the past because it's changing, as we're all pointing out here. That is rapidly changing. We know we're getting ready for it. So from your perspective, Kevin, I'd love to hear sort of what's your forecast for what's happening now and going to continue to happen in really like in the industry as it relates to data? I mean, I'll be very honest, right? Like I've been in many conversations where the topic is, well, third-party data is just dead, right? Like what's the point? Why even have a data strategy? Isn't it all just going away? It's dead. So, help me out here, from your sort of very well educated perspective, is it really dead? Or what's happening? Where's the industry going from a third-party data perspective?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to say it's not dead. So we could all just rest assured, third-party data is alive and very well, probably better off than it has been in many years. And I quite candidly think it's always been in a pretty good space. But I think here at Infutor we believe a few things, and one is as I just said, third-party data is not dead. It's not going away. I think what you're going to see are there are providers that have inherently poor quality or poor coverage. We can see some of those providers having difficulty surviving in an environment where much more of an emphasis is going to be placed on high degrees of accuracy. We certainly can see that coming. I don't think that's going to be a surprise to any of us. And as a matter of fact, Infutor, we pride ourselves in that high degree of accuracy, that fidelity in driving the right consumer outcome for the brand. And we believe that we're going to flourish. An example of that would be, we talked about earlier, if you've got this scale and reach issue, and with a quality challenge as it relates to programmatic around a cookie, and where you go next. And it's our belief that one of the areas you should go into is email. How am I going to connect my offline data into all of these environments where I want my consumers to see my offer, my ad, where they're currently conducting, where they're spending their time. And for us, I'm happy to say, we're sitting on 1 billion email addresses, and these are emails that are responsibly collected from consumers. We've got the right permissions, the right opt-ins, and we're using it as a way so our brands have the highest degree, highest fidelity match that they can get, so that their efforts are going to be most productive in having those meaningful dialogues with consumers. So again, I certainly don't see it dying out. I see we'll call it maybe a renaissance of benefit that's going to be driven back to brands, back to consumers, and it's going to be a data-driven renaissance at that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think that's a great response. And Beck, I think as we talked earlier, as we move into cookieless mobile ad ID all going away, you see both, I think, from a brand's perspective, pros and cons that we talked about, right? Like, what is sort of your take on there's positive things coming out of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a massive pro is that there's a big focus on our own first-party data strategy internally. So looking at the different touch points we can use to first acquire data, and then designing, interesting experiences that offer value to people that, choose to kind of opt in for us to speak to them. And then we work closely with our partner Mercury to enrich that data with their people-based IDs, which we then can activate across platforms. So that's something I'm really excited about. To Scott's point about like consented records, how can we give this a new lens and a new way of thinking, and not just rely on the crux of the cookie that wasn't even designed for advertising initially. So pros, new way of working. Cons is, I guess, more work really, and we have to work out how to get around these things. We have to monitor how they're working. Do we need to shift budget at all? Things like that.
Yeah, I think you just hit on something that was big, is how do we really understand the things that are working? You're exactly right. Like with the pro being more direct relationships with consumers and operating off of more known, identifiable data, people data, that's a pro. You mentioned even earlier, like, hey, the more that I am forced to invest, I guess, with walled gardens, where, the view that I have into what happens there is limited to what happens there versus across as a brand, my entire activation strategy. Are there things that you as a brand are thinking about how are we going to augment learning about what's working? And is that going to look different tomorrow than it has historically, like the measurement side of things, whether it's just, you talk about unique, qualified reach, I think you talk about, right, which I love,
Yeah.
the idea of how are we going to know as a brand quality, are we actually achieving the qualified reach, or what are some of those kind of things that you guys are talking about?
Yeah, I think in regards to walled gardens, it's having your own sort of people-based IDs and being able to push into those environments is great, because a lot of, well, I think Facebook and Google have both removed that sort of third-party targeting. So making sure you have that tool set to work with is really important. In regards to measurement, I mean, it'd be great if we were legally able to sell directly to consumers and measure it that way, but we can't. So, we have our sort of annual measurement we do from a sales perspective. We do one-off tests as well, and we have sort of rough ideas in regards to channel ROI. But I think, and I'm sure we'll go into this, but it's been really nice working with Truthset and actually understanding how our accuracy is looking in real time. So in the past, when we're looking at the accuracy and efficiency of segments, it's been much after the campaign's finished and panel-based and survey-based. So I think having that optimization tool has been really helpful.
Awesome. Well, yeah, hold that thought. We will come back to that. I appreciate that. But yeah, I want to go, Kevin. I'm going to just go to you with one of the questions that probably a lot of our hopefully our attendees have, which is help. What should I be thinking about? What do I do? What are the questions I should be asking? What are the things that from you think maybe people just aren't doing that they should be, as we now. So my last question to you was sort of about, what do you see the industry doing? This question is what should different constituents of the industry, anyone who's touching data, who's using data, who relies on data, what should they be thinking about and doing right now, not in March of next year, but really right now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one that you think would have been, with the advent of the deprecation of the cookies, when we first started talking about that as an industry, my thought was we should have been having a conversation back then, but we can't go back and replace what hasn't happened. If I'm sitting here today and I'm having a conversation with a brand, an agency, another data partner, I'm going to first and foremost talk about, well, let's ready the data assets you have. And let's talk about getting control over the things that you currently can control. You've got a variety of first-party data. Let's fix those fractional identifiers together. Let's get those in a sense where they can be usable and ready, so that you can take action. You may even want to look at how can I, as a brand or anybody else, how can I add more identity on top of the data asset that I have? And so going back to the premise, that we believe there's going to be a larger email economy coming, where email as an identifier, whether it's hashed or not, is going to have such intrinsic value. So how can I add more email to have my data more actionable across more platforms? I'd also say, we should, as an industry, start looking at things like the unified ID and the great work that they're doing. We've currently, Infutor has already tagged our emails with a unified ID. We view that as that important. And so, those seem like pretty basic steps, and candidly, they are pretty basic steps. This isn't us recreating something that's new. These are capabilities that are out there. UID with the exception, right? I know there's significant IP that's gone into that, but these are basic things that we can do as brands, as partners, as agencies. How do we ready our asset and get it going? And on top of that, you can also look at driving more insight into your data. How do I bring behavioral information onto those identities that I have? How do I what cars do they drive? Is there a presence of children, et cetera, inside of the house? Absolutely valuable in helping you get the best audience description, so you can make the right activation conversations and decisions from there.
I mean, I really appreciate you saying, hey, these may seem like basic steps, but they're really important. It's funny, as we were setting up even the context of this webinar and discussion, it was a little tricky because there are so many things we could talk about. You bring up UID 2.0. There's other forms of, authenticated identity that are being hashed out and figured out there. And honestly, we kind of said, yeah, let's try to stay away from the details because we don't have all the answers. None of us on this call are going to have all the answers. But I love your answer of, hey, there are some really basic things that you can be doing to grow your collection of consented identifiable data, right? To learn from that data, to augment it as in a smart, intelligent way, to use that to better understand your audiences. I love that. I think that's a really great challenge, I guess, or advice. And Beck, maybe I will come back now and talk a little bit about, if we can, some of the stuff that we've been doing together, because I think the work that we've been working together for the past maybe 5 months at this point, and I think the series of the series of questions and answers that you've brought to us and we've tried to help you answer has been really good in terms of some of what Kevin's saying, setting you up for hopefully being ready for that next step. So are you, if I don't mind, like, kind of what was the original challenge that you had when we first started talking? We'll go into that a little.
Yeah, so the original challenge was, our three major brands all skew multiculturally, and so it's really important that we're making sure we speak to those different groups. And ethnicity targeting is really difficult to do online. So we actually had a test set up to launch last year where we wanted to compare how effective contextual targeting was of that audience versus data targeting from a sales point of view. And that was slated for March 2020. So that was cancelled, unfortunately. But we came to Truthset and said, yeah, this is our issue. We want to continually optimize. We want to keep being on target. It's just hard. So the first thing that Truthset was able to help us do is to use log files to work out how on target we actually were, and looking at the different segments. And then we were able to use that to inform how we could tweak what we were currently doing on the media plan, but then also use, which I think is their best feature, almost creating super segments. So pulling out the most accurate IDs from different third-party data segments, and then channeling more impressions to the more accurate parts of the segment, whilst also maintaining reach.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the thing that I'm maybe most excited about, there's a couple of things I'm most excited about our work together, and I'll see if you agree, I hope so, is that number one, if for anyone who doesn't know, Truthset, we do partner with Kevin and the Infutors of the world and many other data providers, all based on all of our data starts with some form of identifiable ID, such as a hashed email, right? So we do start with, when we started to score data, we talk about scoring data, and Scott showed those slides earlier of what's the average accuracy. All of our scores are derived from something that's began as a known form of identity versus a cookie or mobile ad ID. So we were kind of thinking that way from the beginning. And what that also means then, right, for you, Beck, is as we evaluate those segments that you just mentioned for accuracy, anything that we have a score against, it's because there's some known form of ID behind it. And I think what you've already even asked me at one point is, hey, Aaron, this is great. You have that quote super segment that is now performing very well for us in the open web. Is that something I can now take into authenticated environments such as my walled garden buys, right? And that's kind of the next part of the conversation, I think, which is ideal. It's perfect, right? Because that is what we want to help you do, is to learn what's accurate, what's correct, do it off of a known set of audience, and then take that and activate wherever you want to activate those audiences, right? And I think hopefully that's kind of what you guys have in mind as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we want to extrapolate across the whole entire plan.
Exactly. So I'm going to give you guys this question before we maybe turn it over to the audiences, and I'll ask it just slightly differently for each of you. Kevin, what's what's the one thing that maybe not enough people are asking about? What would you expect clients or partners to be coming to you and asking right now that maybe you haven't heard you know, or even what questions do you have? Or are there things that you would say, hey, you know, I get this question and I have no idea what this is going to look like 10 months from now?
Yeah. So I think there's maybe two things to think about, or maybe two ways to answer that. And so one we've touched on a little bit earlier, and that is, how do I ready myself for the inevitable? And we've covered that, so I don't need to cover that more. You've gone in, slightly down another path with Rebecca here, talking about, well, once you've got that segment that's created and it's validated, activating that across a number of platforms, which I think is absolutely brilliant advice, because that's ultimately, as a brand, what you want to do. You want to make sure that the segment you create, this high fidelity segment, it can actually be used. And if it can't be used, well, you've really created nothing. And so, how are we going to use it? How are we going to engage with the walled gardens or with any other publishing platform that's out there? On top of that, I would say, well, we have to, as an industry, we have to accept the fact that consumer privacy is here, and consumer privacy is not going to go away. It's actually a net good for consumers, obviously, but also for brands and for publishers, and quite candidly for data providers, data partners like Infutor. And so if we're going to accept that, how do we ensure that safety, that efficacy of the data is maintained throughout everything that we do? And I've become, over the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years, even before we were calling it a clean room, I've become very passionate about how do we control the flow of data? How do we reduce leakage? How do we increase the fidelity? And so, quite candidly, a clean room is a pretty simple concept. It's, as an example, it's Beck and I talking about, maybe she has a privacy policy that prohibits sharing of her very valuable first party data, but yet she wants to come to a company like Infutor, help me fix my identity. Maybe I've got some fractional identities and I want additional insights in, but I can't share my data. Well, a data clean room does that, where I can introduce my data there, not from a PII perspective, but I can have a hash, maybe a hashed email. She can do the same. We're not talking about any other PII coming in. We can then do the work, and Beck can take out the data that she wants back with inside of her domain. Her data never leaves, but yet she's got the ability to do those very fundamental things that she needs. Candidly, Aaron, I'm not hearing enough conversation about that. We talk a lot about it in the industry, but I don't think enough of us are starting to think ahead. Well, how am I going to operate in 12 to 18 months? What are the skills I need to develop today? So that's one I think we should be certainly talking more about.
That's really interesting. I'll turn it to you, Beck, but I'll twist the question just a little bit. Like, what are the things as a brand, that maybe you still feel like, I have no idea. No one has answered this question very well for me, or no one is talking to me about this. I've heard the walled gardens perspective. I've heard major platforms perspective, but I still just don't know X, Y, and Z. Or is it about, how do I use a clean room effectively? What's something that you feel like you could still use, better
it's
answers?
definitely trying to synergize all of those different points of view, because some of it is very technical. So I think always happy for any extra assistance. To Kevin's point, like, how do we continue to ready ourselves? The targeting tactics are ultimately going to affect how we reach our consumers through our media strategy. So how do we need to change those in order to be ready? How is it going to affect, frequency measurement, for example? Does this IP kind of cookie targeting, does it touch geo targeting? Is that kind of bid stream? Is that part of the same workflow, I guess? So it's difficult, and to your point before about how does the brand view this, it's so technical, so it's hard translating that back. I mean, I guess first of all, in understanding it myself, and then working out how best to communicate that back to the business. But yeah, I'm sure much more to learn, and we'll just continue to forge ahead.
And I'm guessing that you, having sat in roles similar to yours in the past at brands, I'm guessing that you play a fairly unique role inside of Heineken USA, in that you're very much a subject matter expert on this topic. And I'm guessing that a big challenge of your day-to-day work is trying to educate the brand teams, for example, because I can imagine one of the last thing on a brand manager or marketing director's mind is probably the loss of cookies or mobile ad IDs. Is that?
Yes,
So,
absolutely. So one thing I do feel really confident with is our current MarTech setup, our current focus on first party data, for example. But yeah, I mean, the brand teams have so much else going on, but it's important, right? Because it's changing. So we need to learn how we're going to adapt.
yeah. And yeah, and hopefully, as we've discussed, there's an opportunity here to turn this into a real win and a success story, I think, right? For you to take to a brand team and say, hey, look, we're actually improving the performance of the brand because these things have happened and we are now set up. We're taking advantage of first party data. We're augmenting it with great third party data, and we're performing better, right? I
Yeah,
think that's
exactly. And even the improvements we've seen so far working with Truthset are hugely reassuring and definitely putting us on the right path.
awesome. Awesome. Kelly, I'm going to pull you back in here and see if there are some questions that we want to throw to our esteemed panelists.
Yeah, we've got a couple. So one is for Truthset. This came up. So operationally, who do you work with? We've got obviously brand here, we've got data partners here, we've mentioned everyone in the ecosystem. Who do we work with? Aaron, Scott, I think you guys can answer this one. Is it agencies, brands, the publishers, only the walled gardens? We've mentioned so many different parts of the ecosystem. Take that one real quick.
I'll take that one real quick, and we can get to others. Sure. We work with a bit of all constituents of the data ecosystem is the answer, right? So we obviously work with Beck and the brands to help, as she's very well described, evaluate data for accuracy and quality, and help make decisions on what to use, how to effectively target. We work with Kevin and Infutor and the data providers of the world to bring insight to the data providers as to what we see in terms of their data accuracy and quality, and how we can help them both improve that quality and promote the quality that they have right now, and talk about from an independent third party perspective. We also work with agencies. Beck has engaged her agency with us. We talk with other brands agencies, as a lot of times the responsibility for choices around data and targeting reside sometime at the agency. Sometimes they reside at the platform. Beck has a very good partnership with her programmatic platform, and we in fact are very engaged with the programmatic platforms as well. So we are participating on all parts of that data ecosystem, I would say, Kelly. So hopefully that's helpful.
Anywhere that data is living, anyone who's working with data.
Anyone who's working with data, that's exactly right. Yep.
Beck, I've got a couple of questions here for you. I'm going to select one out of the three.
My puppy just joined the chat as well.
For you and your furry friend.
Yes.
This is an overall general one. How do you think the business of the brand has changed going into COVID? And maybe we'll keep it towards, there's probably so many things that have changed, but really with data, how has that changed?
Yeah, it depends how we want to think about that, really. I mean, from a beer point of view, everything closed. We saw a lot of consumer behavior where people were reverting to brands that they knew when they were shopping in the off-trade in retail. So that kind of meant that Heineken, we did quite well, which is great. We saw a big shift to e-commerce. If we're going to talk about that specifically, we can't sell directly to consumers. So we needed to kind of optimize our advertising to be more focused on that from an e-commerce point of view, and added some extra functionality to our websites. What else can I say that's related to COVID and advertising? Yeah, it's quite a
how much I'll kind of riff off of one. I think it was how much of the Heineken strategy, we know a lot of it probably revolves around event marketing, sports sponsorship. I assume that was pretty disruptive, huh?
Yes, absolutely. Although I think our partnerships team did an amazing job pivoting where possible. So we did a lot of drive-through sampling events. But yeah, the big kind of tentpole moments like Coachella and things were obviously cancelled, but still a big focus on sports and music events moving forward. I mean, we had a huge amount of success with one of our brands, Ducati, they did a virtual music festival. They did a couple actually, where users could go on and vote for who they wanted to perform, and that was really successful. That's our smallest brand, and we saw the most website visitors to that channel. So I think that was very much playing on the everyone being at home. How can we make things a bit more exciting for you? So looking to do a few more of those this year.
Cool.
That's awesome.
So I have two more questions from the audience. One is for Beck, one is for Kevin. So we'll start with Beck's question since we're chatting with her. How someone wants to know, how specifically is Heineken using Truthset?
Absolutely talk about that. So I mentioned previously, but we need to reach a more multicultural consumers. So the first step was taking the log files from our programmatic partner and looking to see how on target the different data sets were. We then saw the most on target ones and dialed those up on the media plan. And then secondly, we worked closely with Truthset for them to filter out the inaccurate data records out of those segments. So basically we said, okay, we only want those people with a 60% chance plus probability of being multicultural for them to be used across campaigns, and then sort of switch to that approach. And so to Aaron's point, now we're looking at leveraging that almost improved segment across the rest of our plan.
Got it. All right, Kevin, you mentioned clean rooms, and one of the things you said about it is that not enough people are talking about it. So someone has asked the question of, how do I even start talking about clean rooms? Who do I go talk to? What are some characteristics of clean rooms that I should be like really keeping in mind when I'm talking to, the owners, the people who are offering this capability?
Yeah, well, selfishly, I'm going to say, you should come talk to Infutor.
Okay.
And, of course, but a number of companies are enabling their version of a clean room. And, the clean room doesn't have to just be a relationship between a brand and the clean room provider or the data provider. It can be where the clean room exists to operate, to help bring a publisher perhaps and a brand together, and the clean room operator will be as that neutral third party where the data sets are brought together. But by and large, what I've seen is companies that are out there that are doing this are third-party data providers and some others that are specializing in clean room only, and they're out there. You can look on AdExchanger, a number of places to find them. But again, I'm selfishly very proud of the work that we've done at Infutor, and certainly alongside of Truthset and validating our data, we're really excited about not just the technical construction, but also the data that resides within.
Got it. All right. I will leave it open. Beck, do you have questions for Kevin? Kevin, do you have questions for Beck?
Okay, my questions. I mean, I think that your general, the message today is that we should be excited, about quality, Kevin. Do you think, will there be much of a change in how your business operates? Will you need to cut ties with any data providers, or from an operational point of view, is there much work you need to do in regards to getting ready for these changes?
Very interesting question. So, that the cutting ties with data providers, data partners, I would say that's one of those that as a third-party data industry, we've been evaluating our data partners to a very high degree for a long, long time. And what helps us, again, with Truthset, as we're looking at our data inside of their domain, and they've got this very valid, very valuable, scalable truth set of data. Sorry for the double entendre there, but being able to come back to us to say, this is how certain attributes score as it relates to accuracy. It gives us more ammunition to say, well, where are we most effective, and where we need to work? And I'm not talking about Infutor specifically, but as an industry, utilizing the assets inside of Truthset, very valuable. I think one of the things that I would look to see more of is, as we're testing new data coming in, making sure that we include brands inside of that conversation. That's one thing I'm looking to do more of. As I look at an asset, we're originating from from an app, from wherever it might come from, Heineken back. How is this data, if constructed this way, how's that going to operate inside of your domain? Is that something that's going to drive value? Is that going to increase conversation with your consumers, et cetera? And that's the one thing I think we as an industry probably need to do more of. And I'd say that.
Thank you very much for that, Beck. I know I put you on the spot, which also then put Kevin on the spot, but I think these are the conversations that we want to have, right, in this industry. All right, so we're done with our Q&A. I'm going to flip it back over to Scott, and he's going to walk us through, again, how now is the future that we're staring at, and let's see what it looks like. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so let's go to the next slide there, Kelly. Go to the next slide. Yeah, so one of the themes that's come up through the course of this hour is that we're all sort of gravitating towards email as a means of gaining consent from a human being for whatever we're trying to do, whether it's to log them in automatically to a website and provide those services, like as we do with Facebook and all of the apps and things that we use, or if we're getting consent to gather information about them from a data provider perspective to use for a variety of purposes. And so this leads naturally to the big, huge question that everyone's asking themselves about the digital supply side ecosystem. Do we authenticate or not authenticate? And the answer to this question is there's not a choice. Like, everybody's going to have to authenticate. You're not going to be able to monetize a visitor to your website or to your app unless you authenticate them, because if you don't authenticate them, you can't attach data to them reliably, you can't maintain a long-term profile, you can't service them very, very well. And it's like Kevin said a half an hour ago, the answer to this quandary that we're in is actually quite simple. It's a little hard, and we've been all reluctant to go there, but the answer is simple. Ask for consent, ask for permission, ask for email. If your content isn't good enough as a publisher to justify me sharing my email with you to get access to better content or to have personalized services or just to read what I want to read, maybe you suck. I mean, maybe you shouldn't be in business. I mean, it's kind of I kind of look at it that way. So it really is like we've been skirting, the whole industry has been skirting the responsible thing to do, which is to interact openly with the consumer, ask them for permission, and then respect their wishes. And already, I put this slide in here because already, this is actually a couple of years old, so you can get a little bigger, but the numbers on this one, this is from Jounce. Already, the best providers of information and services on the internet are already fully authenticated. All of our behaviors, 85–90% of our behaviors on devices and screens is consented. You log into Netflix, you log into Amazon, you log into Facebook. All that's left is this open internet, which is just it's a healthy ecosystem, but really the punchline is that's going to have to convert to authentication. It's going to have to. And I think the publishers, they're scrambling right now, and rightfully so. Nobody wants to drop some traffic because some people just won't provide an email address, but that's what's going to happen. And that's what's going to enable the future that we're talking about that's on us right now. When we talk about, Beck, using us to build better audiences and find those audiences in all the places of activation, these are email-based audiences. These are places where we've gathered consented information about the Hispanicness of a given ID because it's consented from a reputable data provider, not from the stuff that's all going to go away in 9 or 10 months. So anyway, the point here is, our point of view is, and I think a lot of folks share this, authentication is a good thing. It's going to benefit everybody, consumers, brands, publishers, and marketplaces. And it's what we should, that's where the puck is going. So let's skate there. So go to the next slide, Kelly. Let's look at how we're doing things today and how we're going to do things in the near future. Today, what we're doing is, everyone does this. You build audiences using data sources. Those data sources might be weird segments out in some DSP or DMP. They might be really, really good segments, but there's a lot of not really knowing what's behind that data. And from a Truthset perspective, as a company that measures the accuracy of data, we know that a lot of these data sources are not very good. I mean, 30 to 60% incorrect, and almost none of it consented. And I'm including a lot of like online, like tag-based data collection services here that are trying to find these impossible segments. Nevertheless, today, you build an audience, You push it into the ad tech ecosystem, all these little tools and gears, who knows what they're doing? They're matching IDs, they're adding data, they're extrapolating, they're pushing you out to across device graph. Who knows what's happening? Not all bad, but it's all taken a tax, and it's further obfuscating the precision of that core audience that you built. And so no matter how good that core audience was, it gets worse. And that results in your ads getting delivered to people, sure. But when you add accuracy into that, you start to realize, oh my God, I only reached 30% of the people I wanted to reach, and the other 70% can't even read ads in Spanish. For using the example of a Hispanic campaign. And hit one more builder, Kelly. That means that your economics start to look like this. This is today's economics. You spend $1, the ad tech system takes out somewhere 50, 55 cents of that in taxes for all the services that they're providing, which means your media value is somewhere around 45 cents, the actual amount of your spend that's resulting in your offers and ads and promotions reaching people you thought were Hispanic or whatever your target is. And when you factor in accuracy, or rather inaccuracy on top of that, and you look at the IDs that weren't even Hispanic or weren't new moms or weren't women or whatever it is you're targeting, the value of your dollar reaching people who qualify for your offer or ad is super low. It's really embarrassingly low, and this has to change. So let's go to where the world's going and what you can do now to move into that new world, okay? It's about people-based audience building, right? It's consented identification of actual people, probably primarily via email, right? As we heard from Kevin and the reputable data providers, and demos and behaviors that are gathered responsibly with permission. And that allows us to do things like, and this is looking at actually the current Truthset system. You can right now construct an audience, balance it against census, and know how many IDs qualify from validated data providers, super accurate data, all hooked to hashed email addresses. So then the next question is, well, how do I activate on that? It's not that hard already, and it's going to get better as we move more and more towards authentication. Already, as we said in the previous slide, 85, 90% of the content you care about and the usage and the money is going to authenticated environments. You, a brand, can automatically activate into those environments on a one-to-one match, not even requiring, in some cases, a intermediary ID. Maybe there will be an intermediary ID. That ID, like IDL or UID 2.0, will most likely be based in hashed email anyway. So you're essentially just obfuscating it for a moment, but you're removing a ton of garbage and tax in between your audience, the folks you want to actually reach, all the needles in the haystack, to the places where the people are. And that means that the resulting audience that you reach is the one you want. It's just a chock full of the right kinds of people without that 70% of error and a bunch of garbage polluting the effectiveness of your media expenditure. And that gets us, just one last slide here, to the sort of what the world is going to look like. It's going to look like it looks right now for us and for Heineken and for Infutor. Planning, buying, and measuring addressable advertising against fully consented audiences with validated, accurate data. That's a world we want to go to. It's available now. It's full control of accuracy and scale. You as a buyer control that. You're working with consented data and identity. We said many times in this presentation, a direct ID match based on an ID that the user, the human being, has provided to both sides of the equation, both the supply and the demand. Precise delivery that's measurable. No more of this, who knows what I'm actually reaching. And all that results in really not only better for the brand in terms of media efficiency and ROI, better for the consumer because they're not being abused and their data being sold off endlessly, and better for the publisher who can raise CPMs because they're delivering actual needles and not a bunch of hay. It's just a better world. And so that's the conclusion of our pitch here. I hope this held together in a pretty strong theme, and I hope it gives everybody confidence that there is a clear path to success in this new world, and it's a path you can get started on now. We really encourage you to do that, and that's what we wanted to speak about today.
And thank you so much, Rebecca and Kevin, for joining us. We're really proud to have you both on here. We're proud to call you partners, clients with us. And I know several other questions have come in. We'll try to answer those to the extent that we have people we can reach back out to. We'll try to answer those. But thank you so much, Beck and Kevin, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. My last word is, be like Beck. Reach out to Truthset today and, let us help you. So we thank you all for joining and hope you have a great afternoon.